I went to my sister's gender reveal party. She proudly handed me the ultrasound. Isn't she beautiful? I'm a radiologist. I looked at the image and my blood ran cold. I pulled her husband aside. We need to talk. Now. That wasn't a baby. I watched my sister, glowing in a sea of pink balloons, raising a glass to the baby she'd dreamed of for 6 long years. But as I held her ultrasound photo, a wave of icy dread washed over me, because what everyone else saw as a miracle, I knew was a monstrous lie. It was a gender reveal party, you know? The kind where every surface twinkles with glitter and baby pink ribbons. My mom had gone all out. Streamers cascaded like cotton candy, and this huge banner declared, "It's a girl." Everyone was there. 37 guests, laughing, sipping champagne, just radiating pure, unadulterated joy. My dad, chest puffed out with grandfatherly pride, was already talking about college funds. "This one's a keeper," he'd boomed earlier. I can feel it in my bones. I wished I shared his certainty. See, I'm a radiologist. My job is to look at medical images with clinical detachment. But with Meredith, something had been nagging at me from the beginning. She'd mentioned symptoms that just felt off. Bloating that seemed too much, a persistent lower back ache, a strange hardness to her abdomen. I kept telling myself, "Natalie, you're not an OB. You read CTs and MRIs, not pregnancies." I pushed those doubts away, desperate not to ruin her long-awaited parade. I stood by the kitchen, nursing a sparkling water, trying to force a smile. Meredith had tried to conceive for 6 years. 6 brutal years of fertility treatments, miscarriages, and shattered hopes. I remembered those 2 a.m. phone calls, her voice raw with grief after another failed cycle. The baby shower she'd planned at 8 weeks, only to cancel it when the bleeding started. The hollow ache in her eyes every time someone else announced a pregnancy. When she finally whispered that she was pregnant again, her voice was so fragile, like speaking too loudly might jinx it all. "I'm scared to believe it," she'd confessed. "Every time I go to the bathroom, I expect to see blood." But the weeks passed. The first ultrasound showed a heartbeat. The second confirmed growth. By the second trimester, she finally let herself hope. Our mom practically floated through the house, knitting booties, planning nursery colors. I watched Meredith transform. The anxiety lines on her forehead softened. She started sleeping through the night. Derek, her husband, said she'd stopped checking for spotting every hour. For the first time in years, she was genuinely at peace. Their fertility journey had nearly destroyed them. I knew things most people didn't. The secrets Meredith shared in the dark of night. How Derek once suggested a break after the 4th miscarriage, and how she saw it as him giving up. The couple's therapy that became screaming matches. The night he packed a bag, gone for 3 days. But this pregnancy, it had healed something between them. You could see it in their eyes, a tenderness that had been missing for far too long. Derek was throwing himself into fatherhood with almost obsessive enthusiasm, assembled the crib, painted the nursery, read 17 books on infant development. Meredith glowed, her hand constantly drifting to the pronounced curve of her belly. At 23 weeks, she was radiant in a flowing pink dress. Derek hovered, beaming. "Natalie," she spotted me, navigating the crowd, her face luminous. "There's my favorite radiologist. Come here, I have to show you something." She grabbed my hand, pulling me towards a display of ultrasound images. Guests had been cooing over them all afternoon. "The technician printed these specifically for you," she beamed, rifling through an envelope. She said they're the best images she's ever captured. "Look at this one." She pressed a glossy printout into my hands, her eyes shimmering. "Isn't she beautiful? You can see her little face so clearly. The technician said she's already got my nose." I looked down, ready to make the appropriate sounds of admiration. My brain shifted, automatically, into professional mode. Years of training kicked in. And then, the champagne glass nearly slipped from my fingers. My stomach dropped through the floor. The cheerful party noise faded to a distant hum. I blinked, certain I was wrong. I tilted the image. My hand started to tremble. This wasn't right. This wasn't right at all. "Nat, what's wrong?" Meredith's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Is the baby okay?" I forced my expression into something calm, though my heart hammered. She's perfect, I managed, the lie tasting like ash. Just perfect. Hey, do you mind if I borrow Derek for a second? I wanted to ask him about that home renovation project he mentioned. Meredith's brow furrowed slightly, but she shrugged. Sure, he's by the punch bowl. Don't keep him too long though. We're cutting the cake in 15 minutes. I walked across the room on legs that felt disconnected from my body. Derek was chatting with our cousin, a bottle of imported beer sweating in his hand. When he saw me, he offered his warm, family smile. Natalie, great party, right? Meredith planned this for weeks. We need to talk. My voice came out flatter than intended. Now. Outside. Something in my tone must have registered because his smile faltered. He excused himself and followed me through the kitchen, out onto the patio. The autumn air carried a chill, but I barely noticed. What's going on? He asked, concern creasing his forehead. Is everything okay? Is it Meredith? I held up the ultrasound image. Where did this come from? The imaging center on Riverside. Meredith's been going there since her first trimester. Why? I struggled to keep my voice steady. Derek, I need you to be completely honest with me. Has Meredith shown you the original images? The ones on the computer screen during the appointments. His confusion deepened. I've been to most of her appointments. I've seen the ultrasounds, same as her. What are you getting at? This image, I pointed to the grayscale shape everyone had been admiring. This isn't a baby. Derek's face went blank. What? I've been a radiologist for 12 years. I've looked at thousands of ultrasounds. Tens of thousands. I specialize in abdominal imaging. My finger traced the outline. This mass here, what everyone thinks is a fetus. It's not. The shape is wrong. The density is wrong. There's no spinal column, no distinguishable limbs, no cranial structure consistent with a 23-week fetus. The blood drained from his face. He reached for the patio railing to steady himself. Then what is it? I hesitated, knowing my next words would shatter everything. I think it's a tumor. A large one. Possibly an ovarian teratoma or something similar. I can't be certain without proper imaging, but Derek, there's no baby in this picture. There never was. He stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Inside, through the window, we could hear the muffled sounds of celebration, laughter, the clink of glasses. That's impossible, he whispered. We heard the heartbeat multiple times. The doctor said everything was progressing normally. Teratomas can contain cardiac tissue, I explained, gripping his arm, needing him to understand. They can produce sounds that mimic fetal heartbeats. Listen to me carefully. Meredith needs to see an oncologist immediately. Tomorrow. This thing has been growing for months. If I'm right about what this is, her life could be in danger. His knees buckled. He caught himself, breath coming in short gasps. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Inside, someone clinked a knife against a glass, calling for attention. The clinic, Derek managed, his voice strangled. They did blood tests, HCG levels. Everything came back consistent with pregnancy. Some tumors produce HCG, I said, hating every word. It's one of the things that can make them mimic pregnancy so effectively. Ovarian germ cell tumors are notorious for this. They can fool blood tests, ultrasounds, even experienced clinicians. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. 6 years. We tried for 6 years. Meredith was finally happy. She's been sleeping through the night for the first time since I've known her. Do you understand what this is going to do to her? I understand. My throat tightened. Believe me, I would give anything to be wrong about this. What if you are wrong? A desperate hope flickered in his eyes. You said yourself you're not an OB. Maybe there's something about pregnancy ultrasounds that's different. I wished I could offer him comfort. But the certainty in my gut refused to waver. I've consulted on complicated cases throughout my career. I've seen ectopic pregnancies, molar pregnancies, and yes, masses that were initially mistaken for fetuses. The image Meredith showed me lacks fundamental structures that should be visible at 23 weeks. No vertebral column, no recognizable skull. The density patterns are consistent with disorganized tissue growth, not fetal development. Dererick made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She bought a car seat last week. One of those expensive ones. She spent 3 hours researching which one was safest. How do we tell her? His voice cracked. How do I walk back in there and tell my wife that the baby she's been dreaming about for 6 years doesn't exist? That she might be dying? I had no answer. In all my years of delivering difficult diagnoses, I'd never faced anything like this. The cruel irony of it pressed down on me like a physical weight. Meredith had wanted a child so desperately, suffered through so much, and now the universe had constructed the most devastating deception imaginable. We need to do it privately, I said finally. Get her away from the party. Make an excuse. We can't let her find out in front of all these people. Dererick nodded mechanically, his face ashen. We walked back through the kitchen, where caterers were arranging pink cupcakes. My mother intercepted us. There you two are. We're about to do the toast. Dererick, you need to be next to Meredith and Natalie. Honestly, would it kill you to smile? This is supposed to be a happy occasion. Mom, I said quietly. Something's come up. Dererick and I need to speak with Meredith privately for a few minutes. Absolutely not. She's about to give her speech. Whatever it is can wait. It can't wait. The firmness in my voice made her step back, startled. Please trust me. We need to speak with her now. Before she could argue further, I spotted Meredith across the room, surrounded by well-wishers. She caught my eye, waved me over, oblivious. I made my way through the crowd, Dererick following numbly. Each step felt like walking through quicksand. Guests laughed, chatted, unaware the ground was about to give way beneath us all. Meredith. I touched her elbow gently. Can we talk upstairs for a minute? There's something important I need to discuss. She frowned at my serious expression. Can't it wait? We're literally about to cut the cake. Please. The word came out more desperately than I intended. Just for a few minutes. Something in my face must have communicated the gravity, because her smile faded. She glanced at Dererick, whose complexion had turned the color of old chalk, then back at me. Okay, she said slowly. Let me just tell Mom to handle the cake. The three of us climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, leaving the cheerful noise behind. Meredith's steps grew increasingly hesitant. By the time we entered the bedroom, her hands were visibly shaking. You're scaring me, she said, her voice small. What's going on? I closed the door. The pink balloons bobbing in the corner seemed suddenly obscene. Sit down, I said gently. Please. She lowered herself onto the edge of the bed, hands instinctively cradling her swollen belly. Dererick sat beside her, taking one of her hands. The tableau was heartbreaking, expectant parenthood about to be burned to ashes. I knelt in front of her, meeting her frightened eyes. I looked at your ultrasound, I began, choosing each word with surgical precision. The one you showed me downstairs. Is something wrong with the baby? Her voice climbed toward panic. Oh God, is there something wrong with her? Meredith. I took her free hand, gripping it tightly. I don't know how to say this except directly. What I saw in that image isn't consistent with a fetus. I believe it's a mass, a tumor. I think you need to see an oncologist as soon as possible. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Meredith stared at me, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, then a terrible understanding. Her mouth opened and closed without sound. No, she finally whispered. No, that's wrong. You're wrong. I felt her kick. Just this morning, I felt her kick. Some tumors can cause sensations that feel like fetal movement, especially teratomas, which can contain different types of tissue. Stop it. Meredith yanked her hand away. Just stop. You're not an OB/GYN, Natalie. You don't know what you're talking about. The doctors at the clinic have done multiple scans. They would have noticed if something was wrong. Medical errors happen, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. Especially when everyone is looking for what they expect to see. If the technicians assumed pregnancy from the start, they might have interpreted the images through that lens. I'm not saying I'm definitely right, but I am saying we need to rule this out immediately. Meredith turned to Dererick, desperation etched into her face. Tell her she's wrong. Tell her she doesn't know what she's talking about. His silence said everything. The scream that tore from my sister's throat brought the entire party to a halt. Downstairs, conversation stopped mid-sentence. Someone dropped a glass. Footsteps pounded up the stairs. Within seconds, our mother was hammering on the bedroom door. "Meredith, what happened? Open this door right now." What followed was the most agonizing hour of my life. Our mother burst in to find Meredith collapsed against Dererick, sobbing uncontrollably, while I sat helplessly on the floor. The guests were sent home with vague apologies. Pink decorations were abandoned, monuments to a celebration that had become a wake. My father handled the exodus with a stoicism that must have cost him dearly. I watched from the window as he shook hands, his face a careful mask. Our mother shuffled between the bedroom and the front door, makeup smeared, hands trembling, collecting discarded champagne glasses. Dererick's parents lingered, refusing to leave. When he finally emerged to speak with them, I heard his mother's sharp intake of breath, followed by a wail that seemed to shake the walls. His father stood frozen, his face aging a decade in seconds. Meredith refused to eat. She refused to change out of her pink dress. She lay curled on her side, one hand still pressed against her swollen abdomen, as if refusing to acknowledge the truth might somehow change it. When I tried to sit beside her, she turned away. "Don't," she whispered. "I can't look at you right now." The words sliced through me, even though I understood. I retreated to the hallway. Dererick found me an hour later, slumped against the wall, head in my hands. "She'll come around," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "She's in shock. We all are. What if I'm wrong?" The doubt that had been circling finally landed. What if I just destroyed her life over a misread ultrasound? Dererick knelt beside me. "Then we'll deal with that, too. But you saw what you saw, Natalie. And I'd rather know the truth, whatever it is, than keep living a lie." By midnight, Meredith was in the emergency department at University Hospital. I'd called ahead to a colleague. The fluorescent lights cast everyone in sickly shades of green. Meredith sat in a wheelchair, still in that pink dress under a hospital blanket, her eyes vacant, hands folded in her lap like a broken doll. The on-call radiologist ran a full CT scan while I paced the waiting room, simultaneously praying I was wrong and knowing with cold certainty that I wasn't. Dererick sat motionless, staring at a muted television showing infomercials. Neither of us had words left. My colleague, Dr. Nathan Webb, found me in the hallway outside the imaging suite. The expression on his face confirmed everything before he spoke. "You were right," he said quietly, pulling up images on a tablet. 18 centimeters solid mass, with heterogeneous density. Appears to be fat, cartilage, possibly bone tissue. Classic presentation for a mature teratoma, though we won't know about malignancy until pathology. I studied the images, noting details I'd suspected. The mass had essentially taken over Meredith's abdominal cavity, displacing organs, creating that distended appearance everyone had attributed to pregnancy. How was this missed? The question emerged harsher than I intended. "She's been seeing her OB for months. Multiple ultrasounds." Nathan's expression tightened with professional discomfort. "I've looked at the reports from her prenatal visits. The technicians noted unusual fetal positioning and difficulty obtaining clear images. They chalked it up to the baby being uncooperative." He shook his head. "Confirmation bias is a powerful thing. When you're expecting to see a pregnancy, your brain fills in the gaps. It happens more often than we'd like to admit." "And the heartbeat?" "The mass appears to contain cardiac tissue. Teratomas can develop all sorts of structures, including primitive heart tissue that contracts rhythmically. Under ultrasound, it would produce sounds easily mistaken for a fetal heartbeat." I leaned against the wall, exhausted. She felt a kick. She told me she felt the baby kick. Muscle tissue within the tumor, spontaneous contractions, or possibly just normal bowel movement that she interpreted as fetal activity because that's what she expected to feel. Nathan touched my shoulder gently. "This isn't your fault, Natalie. And it isn't the OB's fault either, though I suspect there will be conversations about liability. These cases are extremely rare and extremely difficult to diagnose." The results confirmed my suspicions. An 18 centimeters mass. Elevated tumor markers consistent with ovarian germ cell tumor. There had never been a pregnancy. Only cells dividing with sinister purpose, building their own grotesque mockery of new life. Meredith was admitted immediately. Surgery was scheduled for 48 hours later. Those 2 days were a blur of hospital corridors, whispered conversations, and Meredith's hollow, uncomprehending stare. The surgery lasted 7 hours. The mass had invaded surrounding tissue more extensively than imaging suggested. The surgeons removed both ovaries, her uterus, and portions of her bowel. Biopsy results came back 3 days later. Immature teratoma, grade 2, malignant. Aggressive chemotherapy was recommended. I spent most of those 3 days in the hospital chapel, despite not having set foot in a church since college. The quiet offered refuge from the beeping monitors, the hushed doctor conversations, and most of all, the terrible silence that had settled between Meredith and me. Our mother divided her time between Meredith's bedside and the waiting room, unable to sit still. She'd brought those baby booties she'd been working on, but never touched them. They sat in her bag like artifacts of a future that had ceased to exist. Dad made calls, researched treatment options, compiled lists of questions for the oncologist. His legal background emerged in force. Derek's parents moved into a hotel near the hospital. His mother took over practical tasks, stocking Meredith's room with blankets and snacks, though Meredith barely touched any of it. His father sat vigil with Derek, communicating in that truncated shorthand men use in crisis. Through it all, Meredith barely spoke. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, responding with single syllables. The vibrant woman who had orchestrated a celebration mere days before had retreated somewhere deep inside herself, somewhere none of us could reach. The surgical team was optimistic. Clean margins. Preliminary pathology suggested no lymph node spread. Dr. Vasquez, the oncologist, spoke with cautious hope. Ovarian germ cell tumors in women your age tend to respond well to chemotherapy. We're looking at a BP regimen. 3 cycles, possibly 4. Meredith listened without apparent comprehension. It was Derek who took notes, Derek who asked about side effects and success rates. Later that night, after doctors had completed their rounds, I found Meredith awake and alone. Derek had finally succumbed to exhaustion. Can't sleep? I asked from the doorway, uncertain if my presence was welcome. She turned her head slightly. In the dim glow, her face looked gaunt, hollowed out by grief. Come in. I pulled the visitor's chair closer. I keep thinking about the nursery, she said eventually. Derek finished it 2 weeks ago. Lavender walls, white furniture, this mobile with little elephants that plays Brahms's lullaby. I spent hours picking out every detail. It's a beautiful room. I'd seen photos. What do we do with it now? Her voice cracked. Do we paint over it? Box up the furniture? Pretend it never existed? I had no answer. Derek will figure it out, I said. When you're ready. When I'm ready. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I don't think I'll ever be ready for any of this. 3 days ago, I was choosing between diaper brands. Now I'm picking chemotherapy schedules. The raw pain in her voice made my chest ache. I reached for her hand, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. Derek never left her side. He slept in that uncomfortable chair, ate vending machine sandwiches, and held her hand through every procedure. I watched him transform from an easygoing man into something harder, more determined, his jaw set against the grief and fear. 2 weeks after the surgery, Meredith finally spoke to me directly. How did you know? I was sitting beside her bed, Derek home for a shower. The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? The ultrasound. Everyone else looked at it and saw a baby, even the doctors. How did you see something different? I considered my answer. Carefully. Training, I suppose. And maybe because I wasn't emotionally invested in seeing a baby. Everyone wanted it to be true so badly that they saw what they expected to see. I was just looking at the image objectively. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had gained some of its former strength. If you hadn't noticed, how long would it have been before someone figured it out? I don't know. Maybe not until you went into false labor and they realized something was seriously wrong. By then, the tumor might have spread to other organs. The outcome could have been much worse. So, you saved my life. It wasn't a question. The surgeon saved your life. I just noticed something in an image. Meredith reached for my hand. Her grip was weaker, but her eyes held something I hadn't seen since that terrible night at the party. A spark of her old self emerging from the ashes. "I'm angry at you," she said quietly. "Part of me is so angry I can barely see straight. I know it's irrational. I know you did the right thing, but every time I look at you, I remember that moment when you took everything away." Tears spilled down my cheeks. "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just give me time." She squeezed my hand weakly. "I need time to grieve a baby who never existed. I need time to adjust to a future that looks completely different than the one I imagined. And then I need to figure out how to live in a world where my sister saved my life by breaking my heart." The chemotherapy began 3 weeks later. I drove her to every appointment, sitting beside her as the drugs dripped into her veins. We didn't talk much. Sometimes she slept. Sometimes she stared out the window. Occasionally, she'd reach for my hand without saying anything. The infusion center became a strange second home. I learned the nurses' names, the best vending machine, which chairs were most comfortable. Meredith developed her own routines, specific blankets, playlists, a superstition about always sitting in the third chair from the window. Other patients cycled through. An elderly man with prostate cancer who told terrible jokes, a young mother fighting breast cancer whose toddler's laughter cut through the gloom like sunlight. Meredith connected with them in ways she couldn't with family then. Perhaps it was easier to be vulnerable with strangers who understood. I learned to give her space. The side effects hit hard after the second cycle. She spent 3 days unable to keep anything down. Derek and I took shifts, holding the basin, wiping her forehead. When the nausea finally subsided, she was too weak to walk unassisted. But she kept going. Every appointment, every blood draw, every scan. The determination in her eyes redefined everything I thought I knew about strength. Our relationship shifted. The anger she directed at me gradually transformed. She still flinched sometimes, a reflexive response to the person who'd shattered her world. But she also reached for me during the difficult moments. The terrifying scans, the brutal side effects, the dark nights when fear threatened to swallow everything. "I need you to tell me something," she said one afternoon, mid-third cycle. The infusion room was quiet. "And I need you to be completely honest. When you looked at that ultrasound at the party, what did you feel in that first moment when you realized what you were seeing?" The question caught me off guard. I'd replayed that moment countless times, but never articulated it. "Terror," I admitted. My first thought was that I must be wrong. Then came the certainty, which was worse. And underneath both of those, this overwhelming dread about having to tell you. Meredith nodded slowly. "I've been trying to imagine it from your perspective. Standing there at my party, surrounded by all that pink, realizing you were about to destroy everything. Most people would have found a way to rationalize it. Convinced themselves they were overreacting. I considered it, I confessed before I could stop myself. For about 30 seconds, I thought about just keeping my mouth shut and hoping I was wrong. Why didn't you? Because if I was right, every day I stayed silent was a day the tumor had to grow, to spread, to become something untreatable." I met her eyes. "I couldn't gamble your life on my desire to avoid an uncomfortable conversation." She was quiet for a long moment. The 4-pump clicked rhythmically. "I would have hated you forever if you'd stayed quiet, and I'd found out later," she said finally. "Even more than I hated you for speaking up. At least this way, I'm alive to work through the anger." Months passed. Meredith's hair fell out and grew back in soft, downy patches. She lost weight, gained some back, eventually regained enough strength to return to work part-time. The follow-up scans remained clear. The oncologist spoke cautiously about remission. One evening, nearly a year after the gender reveal party, Meredith invited me over for dinner. Derek had prepared an elaborate meal. The 3 of us sat around their dining table like survivors of a shipwreck, bound together by experiences we could never fully explain to anyone else. The house looked different. The pink decorations were long gone, of course, but other changes were more subtle. New artwork. Furniture rearranged. The nursery door, which I passed on my way to the bathroom, stood slightly ajar, revealing what appeared to be a home office where the crib had once stood. "We converted it last month," Derek said, noticing my glance. Meredith decided she was ready. It was time. Meredith set down her wine glass. I couldn't keep walking past that door every day knowing what was behind it. Some things need to be released before you can move forward. The meal was surprisingly excellent. Conversation flowed more easily than I'd expected, touching on work and family news and a trip they were planning. I braced myself for awkwardness, for the weight of everything unspoken. Instead, the evening felt almost normal. A family dinner like dozens we'd shared before everything changed. The only difference was a depth of understanding that hadn't existed before. A recognition of fragility that colored every interaction. "I've been thinking," Meredith said, pushing pasta around her plate, "about what comes next." Dererick and I exchanged glances. "The doctors say I can't carry a pregnancy anymore, obviously." Her voice was matter-of-fact, stripped of the emotion that might have colored such a statement a year earlier. "But they also say there's no reason Dererick and I couldn't pursue surrogacy or adoption. There are other ways to build a family." Something tight in my chest loosened. "We've started the paperwork for domestic adoption," Dererick added. "It's a long process, but we're hopeful." Meredith looked at me across the table, her expression unreadable. "I wanted you to know something. I'm not angry anymore. I spent months hating you for what you saw in that ultrasound. For being the person who had to deliver that news. For not somehow being wrong." "Meredith, you don't have to explain, let me finish." She set down her fork. "The anger was never really about you. It was about the situation. About the unfairness of everything. You were just the easiest target, because you were there at the worst moment of my life." She stood and walked around the table to where I sat. Before I could react, she pulled me into a fierce embrace. "Thank you," she whispered against my hair. "Thank you for being smart enough and brave enough to tell me the truth. I would have died without you. The baby I thought I was carrying would have killed me. And now I get to live. I get to adopt a child who needs a family. I get a future I never would have had if you'd kept quiet and let me believe the lie." I held my sister tightly, tears streaming down both our faces. Dererick quietly slipped out of the room, giving us this moment. "I would do it again," I said when I could speak, "even knowing how much it would hurt you. Even knowing you might never forgive me. I would always choose saving your life." "I know." Meredith pulled back to look at me, her eyes wet but clear. "That's what makes you such a pain in the ass. You're always right about the important things." We laughed then. The first real laughter we'd shared since before that horrible party. It felt like breaking through the surface after being underwater for too long. The adoption came through 18 months later. A baby girl, 3 days old, with a shock of dark hair and a surprisingly powerful grip. They named her Hope, which Meredith said was both on the nose and absolutely necessary. The process had been longer and more complicated than any of us anticipated. Background checks, home studies, interviews with social workers who seemed determined to uncover every possible disqualifying factor. Dererick and Meredith navigated the bureaucracy with the same determination they'd shown during the cancer treatment. There had been disappointments along the way, a birth mother who changed her mind, a match that fell through. Each setback carved fresh wounds. But they kept going, fueled by a conviction that their daughter was out there somewhere, waiting for them. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Dererick phoned me from the hospital, his voice cracking with emotion. "She's here. They're placing her with us tomorrow. Can you come?" I dropped everything. Rescheduled patients, delegated responsibilities, drove 4 hours through traffic that seemed designed to test my patience. By the time I reached the hospital, my parents were already there, along with Dererick's family and what seemed like half of their social circle. I was there when they placed Hope in Meredith's arms for the first time. The expression on my sister's face is something I'll carry with me forever. Joy, gratitude, disbelief, and a fierce protectiveness that transformed her features into something almost luminous. "She's beautiful," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "She's absolutely beautiful." Meredith looked up at me, her cheeks wet with tears, and smiled. "She is, isn't she? Our little miracle." Dererick wrapped his arms around both of them, completing the picture of a family forged through loss and grief, and eventually, grace. I think about that gender reveal party sometimes. The pink balloons, the celebratory champagne, my sister's radiant face before it all came crashing down. Sometimes I wonder if there was a gentler way I could have handled things. A kinder approach that might have caused less immediate devastation. But then I look at Hope, now 2 years old and tearing through her parents' house with gleeful abandon. I watch Meredith chase after her, healthy and strong, her cancer in remission and her future stretching out bright and full. I see Derek sweep them both into his arms, laughing at something Hope said in her garbled toddler language. The truth is rarely kind in the moment of its telling. It disrupts and destroys and dismantles the careful structures we build around ourselves. But it also clears the ground for something new, something real, something that can actually sustain the weight of our hopes and dreams rather than collapsing under their pressure. I saved my sister's life by breaking her heart. Given the choice again, I would make the same decision in an instant. Love isn't always gentle. Sometimes it's the blade that cuts through the comfortable lie to reach the essential truth underneath. And sometimes, on the other side of devastation, you find something more precious than what you lost. You find what was actually meant to be yours all along. Hope is currently attempting to put the cat in a dollhouse, while Meredith chases her with a fond exasperation. And Derek documents the chaos on his phone. Our mother sits in the corner, knitting yet another pair of booties for her granddaughter. Her face peaceful in a way it hasn't been since before all of this began. This is what survival looks like. Messy and imperfect and infinitely precious. Built on the rubble of shattered expectations and terrible diagnoses, and the worst night any of us ever lived through. When people ask me why I became a radiologist, I used to give practical answers about intellectual challenge and job security. Now, I tell them about the gender reveal party. About how the right training at the right moment can mean the difference between life and death. About my niece, Hope, and her dark hair and her fierce grip on life. I tell them that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is look clearly at an image while everyone around you sees what they want to see. And then I tell them that the hardest truths are often the most important ones to speak aloud, even when speaking them costs you everything. Especially then.